Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony, which today commemorates the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Operation Bribie. My name is Troy Clayton, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Warrant Officer Class 2 Joanne Davey. We warmly welcome Mr. Peter Collis, representing the President, ACT Branch, Returned and Services League of Australia. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We also acknowledge the members of the RSL and Services Club Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching this ceremony broadcast around Australia. Particularly, we'd like to welcome members of Maitland RSL who are in attendance today. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Thank you. If able, you may be seated. I would now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to the lectern.
"50 years ago today, 8 Australians were killed and a further 26 wounded in one of the most significant battles undertaken by our nation during the Vietnam War. We pause here in the heart of the land they loved to commemorate and remember the courage and sacrifice of those men who fought in Operation Bribie. On the afternoon of the 17th of February 1967, an Australian force found itself facing defeat in a thick patch of jungle near the coast of Phuoc Hoi province. Operation Bribie, as the battle was known, was one of Australia's worst days in the Vietnam War. Planned and in haste, Bribie was an attempt to destroy a communist force that had attacked the village of Lang Phuoc Hai earlier that day. That afternoon, 6 RAR attempted to cut off the Viet Cong before it withdrew. They were expecting to encounter small, scattered groups of soldiers heading back to their jungle bases. The battalion's lead company came under heavy fire soon after leaving the landing zone. What followed was 5 hours of fighting in which both sides suffered heavy casualties. Machine gun, small arms fire and snipers shooting from trees forced the shocked Australians to ground. 6 members of 2 platoon were killed or wounded in less than a minute when they assaulted the Viet Cong position. The Australians assumed this was just an enemy camp. Instead, it was a strong defensive position, its occupants all but invisible. B Company arrived and leapt from their helicopters into the scrub and moved towards the sound of the battle. Meanwhile, facing an enemy company armed at least with 6 machine guns, A Company's forward platoons were lying prone. After 20 minutes of unrelenting fire, they managed to move back, carrying the wounded on their backs. Armoured personnel carriers brought C Company to the battle as D Company's helicopters flew into the landing zone. When the last aircraft was gone, the Australians called in artillery onto the enemy position and planned their assault. Within metres of their start lines, the Australians came under heavy fire. Everywhere men were hit. In poor visibility, hardly an enemy soldier had been seen. B Company's 6th Platoon was ordered to destroy a machine gun position. They fixed bayonets and rose yelling. Enemy bullets tore through some and forced the rest to ground. Then 5 Platoon's commander told his men to fix bayonets, but most no longer carried the weapon. Others couldn't hear anything over the gunfire. The men ran forward with a roar, only to be cut down almost immediately. Hidden machine guns opened up, leaving 8 members of the 9-man strong 1 section either killed or wounded. The Australians had advanced about 25 metres. Half were casualties, and 5 Platoon was almost surrounded and taking heavy fire. The wounded need to be evacuated and the survivors withdrawn from where they lay, just metres from enemy guns. Fires started by grenades added smoke to the confusion, and now enemy soldiers, armed with anti-tank weapons, joined the battle. An hour after entering the jungle, the armoured personnel carriers found B Company, and as fierce fighting continued, wounded men were put on board. One vehicle was struck by a recoilless rifle round which killed the driver. A second round injured the vehicle's commander and wounded for a second time the men in the back who thought their ordeal had been over. Fire from the APCs poured into the enemy positions, eventually making it possible for the Australians to break contact and regroup at the landing zone. In just over 5 hours of fighting, 8 Australians had been killed, another 26 had been wounded. The men who inflicted such heavy damage on the Australians employed impressive discipline and displayed great courage. The official estimates numbered the enemy dead at between 50 and 70. As with so often is the case with the Vietnam War, no one really knew. Most Australians have heard of Long Tan. Many have heard of Coral Balmoral, but the Battle of Bribie was one of the great battles. And today we remember these men, those who were killed, those who were wounded, those who fought the battle, and they and their families who in some cases still suffer as a consequence of having done so.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Trooper Victor Ian Pomroy. Known as Vic, Pomroy was born on the 4th of June 1945 in Camberwell, Victoria. He grew up there and attended Camberwell Grammar School, where he was a member of the school's cadets. He was called up for service with the Australian Army on the 29th of September 1965. After basic training and his initial employment training, he was deployed to Vietnam. Pomroy arrived in Vietnam on the 11th of June 1966, and after a month with the 1st Reinforcement Unit, he was posted to the 1st Armoured Personnel Squadron, which was redesignated as A Squadron, 3rd Cavalry Regiment, in January 1967. Following attacks by enemy units on compounds of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam in the early hours of the 17th of February, a request for assistance was made to the 1st Australian Task Force. The 6th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, was tasked to assist, and A Company was the first to be airlifted out to the area of operations. After moving into the light jungle, the company took enemy fire, and after suffering several casualties, withdrew to the landing zone. B Company followed on the next lift, but the men were forced to jump from hovering helicopters as enemy fire stopped the aircraft from landing. After reconnaissance, it was decided that B Company would carry out a quick attack, as it was believed the enemy numbers facing them were small. B Company, with 2 platoons forward and 1 in reserve, began their attack. After advancing 150 metres, 5 Platoon, now 50 metres ahead of the rest of the company, was ordered to halt. 4 Platoon had been pinned down by enemy fire, and 5 Platoon, now taking fire from all sides, began to take casualties. 6 Platoon moved to the left of 5 Platoon, but was forced to ground under heavy enemy fire. 5 Platoon was ordered to take out a machine gun that was holding up the rest of the company. When the platoon rose and began its attack, heavy casualties were inflicted by well-sighted enemy machine guns, which forces the fivers to take cover. Armoured personnel carriers from A Squadron, 1st Cavalry Regiment, were called in to provide fire support and to extract B Company. Pomroy was driving the lead carrier, call sign 21 Bravo. Soon after stopping to load casualties, Pomroy's APC took a direct hit to the engine compartment from a recoilless rifle fired at close range. The resulting explosion killed Pomroy instantly. He was 21 years old. A second recoilless rifle round then struck the open cargo hatch, wounding the vehicle's commander, Corporal Jeff Strawn, and the medical orderly, and also re-wounding several men, one of whom was being stretched onto the APC at the time the round hit. The wounded and Pomroy's body were transferred to other vehicles. Along with the other survivors of 4, 5 and 6 platoons, they were taken to their original landing zone. Here, the wounded were airlifted to hospital and Pomroy's body was flown out later that night. In total, the Australians suffered 8 men killed and a further 26 wounded. Pomroy's remains were returned to Australia and he was laid to rest in Springvale Garden of Remembrance and Crematorium in Victoria. Vic Pomroy's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, along with more than 500 others who died as a result of their service in the Vietnam War. This is but one of the many stories of courage and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Trooper Victor Ian Pomroy and all those Australians who have given their lives in the service of our nation.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We'd like to thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial. Wish you all a very good night. Thank you.